What is up, everybody? Welcome back to a Run Your Mouth podcast. We got a pleasure today. Every once in a while, I just throw it out in the world and I'm curious about a topic. And then turns out we got real live experts. We're listening right on the chat feed. They send me email, robsnewsroom@gmail.com, and we can dig in and get a bit of an education. Today's episode is brought to you by YoKratom.com, home of the $60 kilo. And there's no organization of all of America that supports a Christian rapture quite the way YoKratom.com, home of the $60 kilo, does. So if you guys are into that kind of thing, go grab yourself some kilos. And now, let's get some education here. So, Mr. Benjamin from ThinkHardThinkWell.com, we're going to dig in a little bit into Christian gospel. We're going to convert some people. I might be going to church later. Why don't you let people know a little bit about your professional background?
Hey, Rob, thanks for having me on. Yeah, I am a professor. I've served as a professor of biblical studies. I've taught at universities and seminaries in Europe and in Asia, and then a couple of adjuncting gigs here in the US. My family and I were Christian missionaries overseas for a little while. So yeah, you're going to get the full on, inside scoop on all this stuff. And I've published articles and books on the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament. That's mainly my specialty. My dad is Jewish and was raised in Brooklyn, not in a particularly religious household. And then I was raised in what we would call an evangelical household with the kind of perspective that was very supportive of Israel and what was going on in Israel. And even though, as you'll see as we get kind of deeper into the weeds here, I no longer hold that a specific theological perspective that makes me want to support Israel politically. I have been in that world and I understand their arguments. And I still have to say I'm not trying to throw those people under the bus. I still consider those Christians, my brothers and sisters. I'm just afraid that they are compromising how Christians should stand for justice in the world because they have this theological blind spot that causes them to support Israel. So I'm hoping that today I can put on my kind of scholarly hat and explain why it is that many American evangelicals in the last couple of hundred years have come to support Israel.
Love it. So let's get into the rapture talk a little bit. But before we do, just kind of going off what you were saying there, I'd like to make it clear. I support religious people. I support everyone in having their religion. I guess conceptually at the moment are taking issue with two very specific things. One is I think anyone in the United States government that is secretly holding post because they're pushing some sort of a religious agenda or interpreting the Bible for some sort of a need for killing other people, I don't see as very. It's not the version of God that I'd like to believe in. And so I just want to make it clear because I am a comedian. I do make jokes, and I definitely will poke fun a little bit as we go here, just in terms of digesting information I don't know, gospels I don't know, but I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, and I assume you probably even have a similar stance.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I am not interested in seeing the Bible, the Hebrew Bible or the New Testament used to promote violence, and maybe we should actually start there first, because I think there's some really important points that are relevant for how evangelicals have misunderstood the way that they should think about the Old Testament and the way it relates to the land and the people and the Jewish people. Is that all right if we go there?
Yeah, well, I'd love to throw out, let's throw them under the bus first. Before we give them the graciousness of just, hey, it's a small misinterpretation, let's go with what is this whole rapture storyline? What is, of these core evangelicals that seem to believe in, from what I can understand, Jews building a third temple and Jesus coming back? But I'll hand it to you because I don't actually know the storyline. I've read a couple articles, and it just seems a little out there for me. So I'll hand it back to you. Why don't you at least let's give them I don't know. The platform's yours to tell us what they believe. Like, what is the actual core belief there?
Yeah. So the essence of it is that when Jesus came and lived on earth at his first coming, he essentially interrupted God's plan that involves establishing his kingdom on earth through the Jewish people. And he temporarily suspended his plan of working with the Jewish people so that then he could have a different people that is made up of people from all different ethnic backgrounds, which we would call the church. But in this line of thinking, there is going to be a time toward the end of time. This is how the world is going to reach its conclusion and go on into eternity. There is going to be a time when God will resume working with the Jewish people again as his people. And so in order for that to happen, the Jews need to eventually migrate back to this land that would have been historically Israel, which is actually broader than just the territory that Israel contains today. So that's part of why there's a desire to keep expanding that territory. But then at that time, at some point when either all of the Jews or enough of the Jews have returned to the land, and in some versions of this, enough of them have converted to believing in Jesus, that means that then everyone who believes in Jesus will be taken away. This is the term for this is the rapture. Maybe you've seen the Left Behind series or all of that, those movies, the books that were very popular. People will disappear, planes will be crashing, empty clothes, suits of clothes just in chairs and stuff, because I guess we show up in heaven naked. But that's not the end of the story. At that point, then the world gets really bad for 7 years, and the Antichrist rebuilds the temple for the Jews in Jerusalem, or actually leads the Jews in a sense, and then he betrays the Jews, the Jewish people, and persecutes them. And this is a really awful time called the tribulation. And then at that point, then Jesus comes back again for real, not just halfway to snatch everyone up, but he comes back for real. There's a resurrection, there's a battle, and good is victorious, evil is defeated. Christ reigns on earth over a Jewish kingdom for 1,000 years. And then there's another battle, and that is the actual final battle where there's a final judgment. And then if you are on Jesus' side, you're raised to eternal life. And if you are not on Jesus' side, then you suffer eternal punishment.
All right,
so
let's
the story.
Let's just break this down a little bit, because there's a lot of specifics here, and I feel like if this was God's plan, I guess he really gave us the whole playbook and really desires some very specific outcomes to, I guess, have everyone, find Jesus in their heart. But let's just start with the first idea that you stated, which was that God was intending on having a relationship with the Jewish people that was interrupted by Jesus, right? Mm-hmm. That was kind of the first statement. So I got to ask that, just the how question of how does the Son of God get sent to earth to interrupt the process that God wanted?
Sorry, maybe I should have clarified, though, that Jesus came to offer the Jews the kingdom that God had promised to them. But because they rejected him, most of them, not all of them, right. Obviously all of the initial apostles and believers in Jesus were Jews, but as a whole, the Jewish people did not recognize Jesus as the Messiah. Right. Therefore, that kingdom was postponed. So okay, it was an offer, but not.
Right. So let me ask you a question.
They didn't take him up on it.
On that one, and I'm outside of my Bible classes. But it would seem to me, if I'm living in Jerusalem, this is towards the end of the Second Temple before the Romans kind of took over, right? Is that kind of the time period?
It was, yeah. The Romans were in charge, but they hadn't destroyed the temple. They'd kind of reached this uneasy truce with they reached an accommodation for the Jewish
and I
people.
guess that was before the siege of Jerusalem.
Yes.
Which took place later. Okay, fine. So during this time period, you got, I guess this is kind of almost the glory days for for rabbinic Judaism. I believe they might have even had like the high court system at that time. I'm more familiar with kind of the religious scholars post the temple destruction when they started to kind of codify the oral law. But you've got Judaism, at the end of its heyday. You got your second temples cooking. You've got your religious scholars in Judaism. It's quite a 180 for some guy to come along and go, hey, listen, I'm actually the Messiah here, and we're not keeping all these laws, but instead you're going to put me in charge, and then we're really going to have a relationship with God.
Hmm.
It just like it would seem to me like God would need a little bit more of a, like, even if you look at the Moses story, he at least gives them the party tricks of, hey, show up with the snake, we're going to have the plagues, we're going to have all these things to kind of show that you're the leader. What was like kind of the, I mean, this is God we're talking about here. God would kind of think things through, have some pretty good plans. So I guess if it's a test of the Jewish people to see whether or not they're going to accept Jesus, right? I guess that was the test. Like if you were in that time, and I guess according to this explanation, the Jews failed that test. But like, what was, what reason would they have had to have accepted Jesus? Like, what was the test of God there for the Jewish people that I'm just within this like worldview was kind of a failed test? Like, why is it that they should have gone, yeah, we're going the Jesus route and kind of 180? You see what I'm saying? I don't know. There's like
Yeah.
something that doesn't add up to me.
Yeah, and so that's a great question, or a couple of questions in there. And again, for the sake of this argument, we would, if we're accepting within the logic of the perspective, the Christian
Yeah.
perspective, that the New Testament contains an accurate portrayal of what Jesus said and did, the perspective that's presented there is that actually things weren't all that great for the Jews in many respects, because their heyday would have been the days
Solomon.
past, yeah, David and Solomon, and that kind of that would have been 1,000 years prior to this time. And so what Jesus claims is that he and the gospel writers are intentionally presenting him in this way, as he's doing things that indicate that he is the fulfillment of the purposes of the prophet Moses, that he's the prophet greater than Moses. The term Messiah is a Davidic term, that he is an inheritor to the throne of David. So he's not just going to, the offer is that he's not just going to, that things are not just going to continue on as they are, but that there's going to be an actual kingdom where the Jews can be independent, and they can present, that they can live in peace, not oppressed by the Romans. Now, the reason then why...
So Jesus' pitch was put me in charge, and then God's going to bestow us with strength, and we're going to be able to overthrow the Romans?
Well, the thing is that is what many of his followers believed that his mission was, because they looked at the promises of the Hebrew Bible, that this is what the Messiah, the descendant of David, was going to do. But Jesus's actual message was that actually I'm going to achieve this kingship and this peace with God through humility, through a life of service, through encouraging people to repent, and then through ultimately laying down his life as a sacrifice for humanity. And so that was why, if you read through the New Testament and the stories of Jesus's life, many times people started following him because they thought he was going to overthrow the Romans. And then he stops, or he says something, then they're like, wait a minute, I thought we were heading to Jerusalem with swords.
Right.
And that then people abandoned him at that point.
Was this also around the time of like Rabbi Akiba and Bar Kokhba, if I'm pronouncing the names correctly?
Yeah, those are correct. It's actually about 100 years before. So that would have been the Bar Kokhba revolt. Them. Yeah, it would have been about 132 to 135 CE or AD. So yeah, 100 years after Jesus. So okay, this was a thing that Jewish people had in mind, that some Jews, not all, right, but many of them believed that there was going to be a messianic figure that was going to restore their independence and the kingship descended from David.
Got it. And so in the Christian, or at least in the evangelical storyline, it was a missed opportunity of the Jews to embrace Jesus as the new Messiah. And since there was that missed opportunity, um, it kind of there's a bit of a jump then to we need to correct for that. It's almost like in the Adam of Eve story. It's almost like we're looking backwards and going, we have to redo it without eating apples, right? So there was this
Mhm.
moment in time where the Jews should have accepted Jesus. They failed and didn't accept Jesus, but in God's
So then the
plan for the
nation's got a chance to get in there.
right,
The nation, yeah.
right, no, but it's like there. Why is it that they believe that there's going to be a redo on this moment? I guess is my
Mhm.
question. Because like if you look at the
Yeah.
apple, the Adam and Eve story, or really any of the other stories in the Bible, mistakes are made by people, and we don't look back and go, well, God's going to give these people another opportunity at the same thing. So this would suppose that they missed their opportunity. God sent them the Messiah. But if we can get enough of these people back in the same region and then also get them to convert up front, then they'll get a second chance at this Messiah.
Yes, the way you're presenting it doesn't sound like it makes sense, and that's because it doesn't make sense to me either.
Right.
So, but I think some of this has to do with it all has to do with the tendency among evangelicals who have this perspective to read the Hebrew Bible, what we would call the Old Testament, in a literalistic fashion that doesn't take account of the way that later inspired scriptures we believe is inspired, transformed the meaning of some of these things. And can I give you a couple of examples of this actually that
Sure.
are really, really important? So, as you've rightly identified in one of your earlier podcasts, one of the most important storylines in the Bible is how the Israelites were saved from captivity in Egypt, and then were supposed to dispossess the land of Canaan from the indigenous peoples there by violence. And so they have these people that they are given carte blanche to go in and utterly destroy. And in the book of Deuteronomy, in the Torah, it makes clear in chapter 20 that they're able to kill everything, all the people, all the animals, and that this is an exception to the normal rules of war. It's like, here are the normal rules of war, but then here's what you're supposed to do to the Canaanites. And the motivation that's given in that text is that they are not supposed to intermarry with and adopt the religious practices of the Canaanites. And scholars will disagree about the historicity of a lot of this stuff. Like, did God actually command this? Did they do it? Did they actually do it? And this would be in the middle of the second millennium BCE. So like 1500 or 1300 BCE. And how thoroughly did they actually do it, if they did? But the relevant issue for religious readers of the Bible is not so much whether the Israelites did this violence, but how these texts were interpreted and applied by later readers, both Jewish and Christian. And so this isn't just a subjective, the texts mean whatever the reader thinks, but rather, does the tradition that we consider the Word of God give us a way of applying these texts in different ways? And so for Jews, there's one example is really, really relevant. 1,000 years later, long after the heyday of David and Solomon, the land is conquered by the Babylonians. Many Jews are deported under the Persians. Many of them are allowed to return in the 6th century. They're recolonizing this land with the permission of the Persian emperor. And we have this situation where Jewish men were intermarrying with what the text of the book of Ezra calls Canaanite women and other groups. And so they're starting to adopt their language, religion, and culture. And whether these women were actually descended from historical Canaanites doesn't really matter. It's not knowable. But the way that the community leaders, Ezra and Nehemiah, read their Torah and applied the kill the Canaanites passages in the Torah was separate from these wives and children, divorce them and send them away. And you can debate whether that was a good thing or a righteous thing to do. I think the text is a little ambiguous on that. But what it does show us is that just killing these people is not it's not on the table. It's not an option for them. So, and they believe that they are faithfully applying the killing passages against the Canaanites by separating from these people. And so for Christian, that's the example. For Jews, a resource within their own text that teaches us how to interpret those violence passages. And for Christians, this is where I think the key misunderstanding happens for the rapture folks, is that in the New Testament, the symbols and the story of Israel are reinterpreted in light of Jesus's birth, life, death, and resurrection. So as we already said, and what I'll say here is this is probably what almost all Christians in all different denominations believed up until about 200 years ago. Jesus is the Messiah of the Jews, but like in many of the books in the Hebrew Bible, the Messiah would be a universal leader that would attract people from many different ethnic groups. Second point is that the Exodus from Egypt is a foreshadowing of the freedom from sin that all people, Jews and Gentiles, can receive by believing in Jesus. And this is why Jesus, the night on which he was betrayed and then he went to his death the next day, was a Passover night, and he's celebrating a Passover Seder with his followers because of that symbolism. The wilderness wanderings of the Israelites and then the conquest of the land these are reconstrued in the Christian story as not being about finding a homeland to violently take over by conquest, but about spiritual striving, dare we say a jihad, but a spiritual striving in the Christian life until we reach the promised land, which is eternal life. And that's in the letter in the New Testament that we call the letter to the Hebrews, chapter 4. And then this is the real important part, and then I'll let you stop and ask questions. But the land that is promised to Abraham's descendants in the Hebrew Bible is reinterpreted in two ways. The descendants that are going to be the physical descendants are actually reinterpreted as Jesus himself, the true descendant of Abraham, and then all those who believe in him, regardless of ethnicity. And so this is why Christianity is we might call a universal religion that anyone can join. It's not an ethno-cultural religion, like Judaism. I mean, you could convert to Judaism, but you have to go through a process to get in. Whereas with Christianity and Islam, all you have to do is say a confession and you're in. And then the land, the promise to Abraham, is reinterpreted. It's expanded to include the whole world and not just a strip of land in the Middle East. And so Jesus actually, by what he came to achieve, is not just giving a small strip of land to a small ethnic group, but inheriting the whole earth for all of those who put their trust in him. And so I think that this is a fair summary of what most Jews, at least the other perspective about violence and how it's really more about separation, and then what most Christians believed about the land and the promises until about 200 years ago, when some interesting interpretations were floated.
All right, so let me kind of recap here.
Yeah, sorry, that was a long rambling.
No, it's all good. So before we get into the evangelicals and their reinterpretations, I have no knowledge of the New Testament. I honestly don't even know that much of what the Christian gospel or storyline is. It's just not part of my education. But essentially, Jesus comes along and he goes, "Hey, I'm the new Messiah, and I am going to lead the Jewish people, and we're going to get rid of the Romans." But also at the same time, Jesus is a reinterpretation of large parts of the Bible, which include, I guess there's not even a need to be in Jerusalem, because it's more of just actually there's no reason for conquest or going anywhere because we're only describing spiritual journeys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would just say that Jesus didn't claim that he was going to overthrow the Romans, but that's what people interpreted his messianic message as, because they were reading their scriptures. Now, so it was a little bit unexpected.
Isn't there something a little bit, I'm trying not to knock it here, but I will just ask the question the way it's coming to me in my head. It seems a little silly to me to be standing in Jerusalem, an area that's conquered by Jews, and going, hey, the people that were here that came to conquer this territory got this wrong. And when we left Egypt and we were wandering the desert and then we were brought here, we actually could have just gone anywhere because this was about a spiritual journey. Doesn't that
Hmm.
just not line up with the Bible? I mean, if you're going to accept the Old Testament as accurate, you have the Old Testament story. We're taken out of Egypt by God and we're brought to Jerusalem. So then the whole being brought to Jerusalem thing and then onwards, everyone just had gotten that wrong until Jesus came around.
Well, I would say, and again, I think this is, you know, I'm a Hebrew Bible scholar, but I'm also a Christian, so do with that what you will. But I think that the Hebrew Bible itself contains within it both the Torah and the prophets and the writings contains within it these seeds of it's not just about Jerusalem. It's not just
No,
about this
I
land.
understand going, hey, it's not just about, but that to say it's not just about, like, sure, I mean, even within religious Judaism, you'll have people saying that, like, there, after the Second Temple, the whole thing kind of got recreated into more of a study of Talmudic law. It moves away from sacrifices. Like,
Mhm.
I mean, there were core activities of the Jewish culture and religion, which would revolve around a temple and sacrifices that doesn't exist anymore. And no
Yeah.
one said, hey, we're done with Judaism. It pivoted. But
Mhm.
that's a lot different to me than reinterpreting is also, I don't understand how you separate that from rejecting all the earlier activities. Like, because you're not just going, you're not saying, hey, I'm here and we're going to be starting a new journey. That's something that's a different claim.
Well, I think Jesus, as presented in the Gospels, is not saying this is a new journey. He's saying this is what the old journey was leading
But
us
it
to.
wasn't. Wait, well,
It wasn't?
I mean, I
I
guess you
mean,
could say, I mean, to say that when they were coming to Israel, yeah, that's that's already a different claim. So it's
you have
not so much
passages
that,
like Isaiah 2 where it says
yeah.
that the Torah, that the nations will stream to Jerusalem and say, let's go to worship the God of Israel, and let's, Hashem will judge us and teach us his ways, and the law, the Torah, will go forth from Zion. So it's like it's envisioning that Israel would not just be this people that keeps to themselves, but actually then the goodness of the Lord's law would then spread out to all nations. So there is a universal vision, I think, in the Hebrew Bible.
Well, I would, from what I remember, the universal vision of the Hebrew Bible was that, firstly, anyone can convert to Judaism. I think, if
Sure.
anything, there's a lot of laws, and so the screening process is more of a, hey, are you sure you want to do this? Like, you don't have to do this. You're going to have to keep a lot of stuff. Are you sure you want to do this? It's kind of a burden. And then even in the Jewish faith, if you convert, you're not allowed to ask someone about their past. Like, it's a
Mhm.
law in the Bible that once someone converts, they're Jewish. You're not supposed to be like, hey, where'd you
Mhm.
come from? Why'd you end up here? They're part of the crew at that point. No questions asked.
Mhm.
I think the idea of Judaism for the other religions, and maybe this is too charitable of an interpretation, but it's that everyone else is supposed to, the other nations are supposed to keep the 7 laws of the sons of Noah, which I think is a slightly abridged version of basically the 10 Commandments that I would assume. I don't remember, but I would just assume it doesn't include maybe keeping Sabbath, and maybe I don't know. I don't quite remember, but I think it's like just those man-to-man laws of don't kill people, don't steal.
Yeah.
It's those
Natural
things.
natural law is kind of
Yeah,
what, yeah,
you're
you might
basically down to
characterize it
natural
as.
law, with the idea of the Jewish people having additional things that they have to keep, and then hopefully being a light onto the other nations. Of, I guess, here's the reasons for, I don't even know from there, of keeping your natural law, but just you're not really required to do more. So I don't know that, like, that necessarily, like, that interpretation would be a rejection of the idea of, like, what you just put forward from, I think it was Ezekiel. I don't actually
Isaiah.
don't know the, yeah, I actually don't know the later books of oddly enough, we studied the first 5 and then we jumped to Talmud, and I didn't delve all that into all those later prophets.
Well, but even in the Torah, you have
Yeah.
Genesis 12, Abraham, the promise to Abraham is that all nations of the earth would be blessed through him and through his descendants. So there's something there. No, I think that's a fair point. In a sense, what we're arguing is we're arguing about the religious
right.
difference between religious Jews and religious
Right.
Christians.
So I'll tell you
About
what, because
where does the Old Testament or the Hebrew
right.
Bible direct us?
So I'll pivot because I actually have no interest in I don't want to nitpick at Christianity at large because one, I'm not that informed on it, and two, I prefer to just take a pro-religious stance, and whatever way you find faith or want to do it that doesn't include killing other people or hijacking our government to send resources to particular teams, like I don't take issue with. So why don't we pivot back to specifically this evangelical I guess change that you say took place 200 years ago, where I guess they're going to back to a more literal outlook at the Bible, which then in tandem comes with a very specific recipe. Which I'm gonna ask you this question: How did this prophecy become so specific? And according to them, it's a two-part question. Is this the only way we're getting into heaven? Like, is this now the only way that this story can go for us to have firstly, what is their storyline of how this prophecy came to be? Like, it just seems very specific. And two is, in their head, is this the only recipe for success?
Yeah. So yeah, the second question is shorter, so I can answer that more precisely. Is that yes, this would be considered the only way. Now, I think for those who have the more complicated, very detailed view, and for religious Christians who don't take this same view, though, like myself, we can still be, in a sense, exclusivistic, meaning that we believe that Jesus is that everybody, Jews and Gentiles, needs to believe in Jesus. That doesn't mean that we have to say that all of these specific end times things are part of the plan. But the first question, how did this come to be? Well, in the 18, go back to the 1820s and 30s, you have this movement that begins in England called the Plymouth Brethren, founded by a fellow named John Nelson Darby. And this is a new set of interpretations based on a very literalistic reading of the Old Testament. So he was frustrated with he was an Anglican cleric who was frustrated with the not seriousness or theological liberalism of the Church of England. And so he was looking for groups of people who would read the Bible with him very closely, and they were reading in a very literalistic fashion. And so they came to believe that the promises for ethnic Israel in the Old Testament are still applicable for ethnic Jews and not transformed in this way in the New Testament. And so God's plan for humanity is temporarily suspended. As we said, the word parenthesis is used while he works with the church, which is all ethnic groups, but then will be continued when the Jews return to Israel, rebuild the temple, and then convert eventually to believing in Jesus on a large scale. And there's various, I'm a Hebrew Bible scholar. I've studied the history of religion. This is not my particular field, but I lived in it, as a person, as an adherent to it for a while. But I think that part of the reason why this spreads, there's a few stages that lead to this spread. One is that there is a desire among the lay people to have these Bible reading groups that get back to the biblical text, apart from establishment religious figures like theologians and church hierarchies. This gets exported then to America, or imported to America, where there's a much more free market in religion, and it's very difficult to have religious authority in the frontier. So if you're a Presbyterian or a Catholic, a Presbyterian minister or a Catholic bishop, you can do what you can do, and you're, maybe supervising a few different churches. You're riding on a circuit in the 1860s to minister at all these churches. But then if some guy shows up in your town, one of these towns throws up a tent and starts preaching
start preaching,
revivalism,
right?
he can just do whatever he
So
wants.
evangelical, the U.S. was an open market for
Yep.
evangelicals. So here's my question now. Let's
Oh,
say
but
you're an evangelical and you
what,
believe this.
one more really important
Yeah.
step that happens here, it does actually go through traditional authorities. In 1909, there's a lawyer, not a theologian, named C.I. Schofield, Cyrus Schofield, guy with a rather sketchy pre-Christian personal life and no theological training, but he writes notes on the Bible, like study notes on the Bible that contain this perspective. And he had a friend who was at Oxford University Press. And so in 1909, his notes were actually published by OUP as the official King James Bible that was published in the United States. And so this is how this particular approach spread very widely to
How does that
American
happen?
households.
So just some random guy's notes gets canonized as if it's like Christian lore?
I don't know. He was very entrepreneurial, and I would say, I mean, having read these, so funny story is that the Christian university that I attended, which no longer holds this perspective, was actually a predecessor or a successor university or institution to a Bible Institute founded by this guy, C.I.
Right.
Schofield. So we had to read these notes when I was in college. We had to read the Bible along with these notes, even though most of the professors didn't take them that seriously anymore. But I mean, most of this stuff is pretty common sense, I would say. It's really only a very handful of passages that have this particular perspective. So there's not really a lot of red flags if you're just
Right.
a traditional Christian reader. This gets in very
All right.
easily.
But now
But it is that sort of like popular level
Right.
plus the authority, the authenticity that gets given by the OUP publication.
So let's go. You're a hardcore evangelical. Let's just say that there was a committee of hardcore evangelicals, and let's just imagine a universe where literally there was a one world government, and these 5 people sat on top of the one world government, and they controlled the world, and they could absolutely make decisions. So I'm asking, would step 1 to them be, hey, we got to round up all the Jews and send them to Israel? Step 2 is we got to figure out how to convert them to Judaism. Step 3, we need them to go build a temple. Like like I'm just saying, if they could absolutely to a T work out their plan and get us, anyone who accepts Jesus into their heart, their ticket to heaven, because they believe that this is like in their heads, this is what God wants. God wants us to be in heaven, and he gave us a specific recipe on how to do it. And now you've got full control to go exercise and do it. Is that it? Is that the recipe here? Step 1, force everyone to go there. Step 2, force them to convert. Step 3, we got to force them to build a temple. And then it goes on autopilot from there. Like we've done the steps we need to do.
Yeah. I mean, the way you put it sounds very, because you've created this one world government that makes this happen, it sounds very coercive. But what I think, yes,
you're saving everyone from eternal damnation, and you're bringing about God's plan into the world. So who cares? Once we're working with God's will, you can remove our earthly concerns about force, because you've got the Word of God in your hands. And like, of course you should use force. You can save people.
Well, I don't think most people, even who believe in Scripture, would put it in that way, because the use of force would override the choices that people made. I mean, you can't force someone to believe in something.
Who in this prophecy said anything about needing to make choices?
Well, and that's the problem, is that I think what most people don't understand is that what we have, and many Jewish scholars and Christian scholars have pointed this out, is that it's like the relation between religious or Jews and Christian Zionists is kind of a marriage of convenience, because Christian Zionists all believe that Jews need to believe in Jesus in order to have a relationship with God and be saved. So it does feel like this, like,
just in terms of understanding, if you're a hardcore evangelical and you had the power to do what I said, is that the recipe?
That sounds, yes, I guess that's right. Yeah.
Okay.
I'm not trying to attribute. Yeah, I guess so.
Okay.
The short answer is yes.
So then, amidst the hardcore evangelicals, I guess my next question would be, because obviously they don't have that kind of power, they don't have that kind of control over the world. And in my opinion, like, working government posts and trying to push anything that's coming, like, that seems to me to be, I'm not hating on Christianity. I'm more just hating if you've got this interpretation using government resources to push it. But I'm curious to know, like, I guess what percentage of like the world or even American Christians, like, are taking this perspective,
Hmm.
and two, of the people in government, because I think, if you think you're working, and this is sometimes the problem with religious faith, but if you think you're working with the hand of God, so it's like, yeah, you should lie to your constituents. Of course you should. Like, you've got to try and push forward on this heavenly plan here, which it just changes the rules of the game in terms of kind of morals and ethics when people, which I think is the same problem sometimes with terrorism and killing people in the name of God, is that you think you've got, God has instructed you to do so. So even though you're doing something atrocious, it's for moral capacity. So I guess my question is, like, it's really two part. How big do we think this problem is? Like, how many people are we actually talking about? How many people potentially in government, and how aggressively are they actually trying to push on this?
Well, yeah, those are difficult factual questions, but
Right.
the fact is that I would say this theology, this general understanding of the ethnic Israel and the Jews have an important role to play in the end times, is the default theology about the end times for people who go to most like non-denominational megachurches, most Baptists, most people who identify as Pentecostal or charismatic, and then many smaller groups within more mainline or would
So
call
I get it.
confessional traditions.
So here's what
So,
we're
but
looking
but
at.
those are some of the
Yeah.
biggest groups in America.
No, so
So
I get it.
now,
It's a
how
little
much do they
bit.
prioritize this? It varies a lot based on the church and how big a deal this is for them in terms of how much they focus on it.
No, I think I get it. It's a little bit more casual. It's a little bit like what I think Colonel McGregor has described of the U.S. war agenda, which is, let's just go there and we'll figure it out. And so it sounds to me like people just loosely uh, buy into the concept that in order for Christianity to move forward and for the Messiah to come back, we do need the Jews to be in Israel. And so they're just supportive of that concept. But there's not really, no general has sat down with an A, B, C, D, E storyline that people are looking at. People have just largely bought into the idea of, hey, let's have the Jews in Israel and let's support that, and we'll kind of see how it plays out.
Well, and to be fair, there are other priorities and other things that the Bible says have to happen as well. Or in this literalistic reading, for example, the gospel, the good news about Jesus, is supposed to be preached to every ethnic group in the world, and so there are many people which is as a Christian, is something that I support, but it's something that's a very very long and arduous task.
Did
So
you say
there's a lot of stuff that has to get done.
the good news about Jesus?
Yes, the gospel means good news.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fun. I like the idea of knocking on a door, being like, "Hey, good news, people of Africa! 1,000 years ago, there was this Jesus guy, and if we get enough Jews in Israel, he might come back, and you can go to heaven."
But the gospel is not about the Jews. It would be
Right,
about
right.
Jesus. Right?
Yes, no, I get it. All right. So, last couple questions while I have you here, and then I'll give you the floor if you think we missed anything, or if there was anything else that came up on Run Your Mouths you wanted to address. But while I have you here, this came up. We did a wild part of the problem when we were in San Diego, because I had brought up the topic of the rapture, and we had some evangelicals in the first row. It was wild. The audio was not great, so I don't even know if it's going to be put out, even though there were some really fun and funny moments. But the concept of the Jesus missing years and that he might have gone to Japan had come up. And this came out of when I had asked, I was just making the joke of people are very excited for round 3 Jesus, but it doesn't seem like he did a lot in round 2. It sounds to me like he kind of came back and said, "Hey guys, I'm back," and then just left. So I'm curious if I don't know the gospel. I'm actually asking, like, in the Christian storyline, when he came back the second time, what did he do? And is there some storyline of 12 to 30 Jesus? We don't know what he was doing, and he might have been in Japan.
Yeah, I've never heard that bit about Jesus being in Japan. I
Okay.
have a close colleague who's in Japan. I could ask him. Um, but so I mean, I would say that what you're calling the second round Jesus is after he's raised from the dead,
Yeah.
and then he ascends into heaven.
Right.
So 40 days, that's a very short period of time in the story. I would still think of that in terms of first round Jesus. This is just his life, his death, and his resurrection and his ascension. And then the second coming would be second round Jesus. Now, the problem with, again, this rapture theology is that second round Jesus comes back, but then he stops and he goes back up, right?
Right.
That's what he takes everyone who is his
Well, I guess
people with him.
that's his party trick. He likes he likes ascending to
He's
heaven.
Yeah, and this is I think a complete misunderstanding of the
Right.
text that's there. It's the wrong way of looking at it. Um, but yeah, I mean, I would say.
So what
Sorry,
did
yeah.
in the 40 days before Jesus ascended to heaven?
Mhm.
So he was just like dead. He was down in hell. There was 40 days of Jesus like battling demons in hell. Like what was he doing for those 40 days?
There's a couple of passages that are more obscure in the New Testament that speak about him going to the place of the dead. It's not exactly clear what he did there, but the testimony of the Gospels is that he bodily rose from the dead, and so his spirit was reunited with a recreated physical body, and he lived in that body for 40 days on the earth before ascending into heaven. And that is the basis of the Christian hope, which is that all those who believe in Jesus, even if we die in these bodies, that we will still at some point be raised again and receive new bodies that are somehow like Jesus's body, physical and yet recreated. And we don't know a whole lot about that, what
Right.
that looks like, because we
If
only have one example.
All right, I just got one more question on that though. If there is an afterlife and I get to go to heaven, why do I got to keep my dumb stupid body?
Well, this is interesting again, because Jesus, I think there's something profound in that question. And I've thought a lot about this, and of course, late night discussions with Christian friends, guy friends in college, you come up with all sorts of stupid, stupid scenarios. Like what
Right.
happens if a cannibal eats a missionary and then the becomes part of his body, but then the cannibal becomes a Christian and then dies immediately, and then there's the resurrection. So where does this matter? Does the matter get to be part of the missionary's body,
Right.
or the repentant cannibal's body? I think that there's something, just as Jesus is presented as having marks on his hands and in his side from where he had scars of his previous life, but yet is completely healed. There's some sort of continuity with our former appearance and our former existence, yet we won't have sickness and death and illness anymore.
But why is that better than just being in heaven? Like I guess in my version of Judaism or whatever, you die and you go to heaven. So if I die and I go to heaven, why do I got to come back and be reunited with currently in the Christian belief? So if you die, are you not going to heaven? You're just chilling in your body until someone brings Jesus back?
My understanding of the Jewish hope as well as the Christian hope is that when you die, your spirit goes to a place of rest, but that there is a physical resurrection that will happen at the end of time. And the reason is because human beings are created. They're created body and soul to live in a body embodied existence. I mean,
isn't that a knock on heaven?
You can't enjoy stuff.
Isn't that a knock on heaven to say that there's a better version of it, which is being reacquainted with your body? Like I would think that to me the theoretical spot of heaven that doesn't include a body is a pleasurable space beyond my current comprehension. Having to come back to Earth in a body, but it's a better version of Earth, sounds a lot more limiting than the theoretical heaven.
Well, but why not have the spiritual ecstasy of the communion with God and also physical existence where you can enjoy,
but why have the physical? I'm just saying,
because that's how God created us, to be both soul and body.
Right, but then to be of soul, why would I want to be of soul of body if I can have the option to just be soul?
I mean, this is getting real deep and philosophical into Platonism and both Judaism and Christianity had their challenges, were challenged by Platonism and this view that
Right.
just being in the spiritual realm is just better. And this is where I think a lot of both Jews and Christians don't understand their own traditions, but
Right.
the actual hope and the actual natural mode of human existence is to live as body and soul together. And that's been screwed up by human sin, and that leads us to death, but that the hope is for redemption, not just of our souls, but also of our bodies in the last
So
day.
the hope is, and are we living to infinity in this new reality? So I'm supposed to, so I get an infinite existence of body and soul. Like that's the ideal.
Yeah.
I don't like this.
I don't know. I like, but you're not getting old. You're not getting sick. You get to eat grapefruits and chocolate as much
I
as you
don't
want.
know. I kind of like I now I'm kind of liking the idea of just at some point having a capacity and checking out. I don't think I like the idea of infinite existence on this earth, but I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll be great and wonderful, and I'm just not understanding it. All right. Before I let you go, I really do appreciate you coming on, giving us the insight. And firstly, I love that there are actual academics listening to the show, and I really appreciate, because you do know my humor sensibilities, that you were willing to come on and share these topics with us. Before I call an episode, I will hand you back the floor if there are any other specific things you thought we overlooked, you really wanted people to know, or anything else. Even if you just want to let them know where they can find you, and possibly I don't know, maybe you might be reaching people in the foreign lands. You don't even need to knock on their doors.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I would say, I think the note I want to end on is a friendly note to those people who I think are making a big mistake by supporting Israel on these religious grounds. I mean, we can understand historically there's a lot of sympathy with Israel because of the Holocaust and because of the prominence of Jews in American life. It's very, very important. And I think that it's possible for a Christian to take a more pro-Israel stance, but not for these reasons. And so if you're doing just this, if you're taking this perspective, then this is what that evangelicals will tend to gloss over the unethical things that the Israeli state does, because they would say the end justifies the means. And so to my fellow Christians, I would say the end does not justify the means. And so I think that Christians should be seeking to call both, Hamas, the Palestinian people, and Israel to justice and to behave in a just way in society. And that doesn't have anything to do with a religious belief about the significance of Israel. And I really appreciate you, being willing to talk about this, Rob. I think I felt comfortable coming on, even though, because I really appreciate, what you and Dave are doing. I really appreciated the honesty that you guys had about COVID and about all of these things. And I really appreciate even though I'm not sure I'm all the way there with you and Dave on the Israel stuff on secular grounds, I still felt like we could have an honest conversation, a thoughtful conversation. And I think you sometimes sell yourself short. I think you're really smart, and not just trying to, flatter you, but I think it's a really thoughtful show, and I appreciate it. So thanks for having me on.
I do have a natural curiosity, and so when I can get my hands on some experts or people that are, knowledgeable on the topics that are kind of coming up, and I'm curious, and it's nice to fill in some of the gaps on what I really just don't know. So thank you once again.
Well, if you have any other questions, people can find me at thinkhardthinkwell.com. And Rob, you can hit me up again if you have any other biblical or theological questions. I may not know the answer, but maybe I can find the answer. So.
Hell yeah. This ruled. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too.